Good morning. We begin today's daf. Today's daf is daf Lamed, daf 30 in Meseches Bava Basra. We begin by thanking our sponsors. We thank Batsheva Pava of Hashmonaim Israel for sponsoring and dedicating all of the shurim and the drashos to the month of Tammuz in commemoration of the Yahrzeit of their father Reb Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh Vegh of Philadelphia and his first Yahrzeit. We also thank Derek and Lauren Fine for sponsoring Daf Yomi this morning in memory of Isaac Kaufman, Zechron Levracha. He is the grandfather of Becca Friedman. The neshama should have an aliya l'Gan Eden, and the family should have a neshama. So yesterday we began this very quickly. Let's do it again, just because we only hit the surface of it. And we're going to go through a number of cases today, which is what's fascinating about today's Amud, is that today's Amud is a bunch of cases of Yehuda Amalei Lechavre. And it seems like these are real stories that happen, real cases that came before different Dayanim. And what's interesting is perhaps as we go through them, we might be able to analyze some of them and ask, well, why didn't he say this? Or why didn't he say that? And a lot of times the answer is going to be because that's not what happened. In other words, a lot of times in the Gemara, we might have cases that are designed cases, and those cases are really just brought there to illustrate a point. They may not actually have been cases. But the language of the Gemara over here seems to indicate that this is just what happened. This is the story that happened, and therefore we're going to be paskening the story based on what happened. But it's true that if we were to start, playing around with the details, what would be if he would have said this? What would be if he would have said that? The halacha might actually change. So let's now go back to the case we started yesterday, which is Yehuda Amalei Lechavre. So interestingly, another point, in all these cases, these people are arguing over a significant argument. It's the argument of a home purchase. And the Gemara still manages to describe every one of these cases as Yehuda Amalei Lechavre, the person who said to his friend. I think it's an important Musar Haskel. Even when you get into a fight with somebody, the person doesn't have to become your enemy. There are sometimes we find ourselves having financial disputes, but still, a person could still be one of your chaverim, and make sure to maintain your friendship, even if you don't agree about things. So, Yehuda Amalei Lechavre, this person who said to his friend, "My bayis b'hai beisa." What are you doing in this house? So Amarlei, he responded to him, and he said, "Minach zavinte." I bought this house from you. In other words, I'm acknowledging that you used to be the owner of this home. However, I bought it from you, va'achlis shnei chazaka, and I have eaten the years of chazaka. Now that's the terminology that we use throughout the Masechta, which means I either consumed the use of this property, or simply va'achlis, although it means I ate the years of chazaka, it means I satisfied the requirements of using this field for the requisite amount of time that would establish a chazaka. So, in other words, that seems to be, everyone's agreeing about that. So, whether or not it was bought is a good question. That's obviously why they're arguing. The original person is saying it's still my house, and the person who's living in the house is saying I bought the house. Now, he claims that I was in this house and I satisfied the requirements for a chazaka. Amar lei, so the me'arer, the person who's coming by and he's complaining, get out of my house, he said to him, Ana b'shkuni kavai havai. I was in the internal areas of this home. In other words, the entire time that you were in this house trying to establish a chazaka, he's essentially throwing a wrench into all of that. He's saying, the time that you were living there, you weren't establishing a chazaka. You may have been there, but I was there the whole time with you. So therefore, your chazaka doesn't work. There's no chazaka. You've not established anything because I was there the whole time. If you look at Rashbam, what he explains it is, "B'chadarim hapnimiyim haisa ikar dirasi." I was living in the inner chambers of this home. V'hayisi over derech alecha. I would constantly pass through your area. Umishtamish imcha bebeis hachitzon shadarta bo bershusi. And I was using the external part of this house where you lived, and I gave you permission to live. Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate it. V'lakach lo machisi. In other words, what he's explaining is, you want to know why throughout those 3 years I didn't kick you out? Because I'm a nice guy. I allowed you to stay in my house. But, why did I have to come by and say, get out of my house, or this is my property, you don't belong here? You know what the answer is? I didn't have to say that because it was obvious that you were my guest in my house. And I allowed you to stay here. Now, what kind of chutzpah do you have now? You turn around and say, oh, yeah, this is my house now. I'm going to be staying here forever. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvarav. So essentially, he's calling into question the entire chazaka. The claim is a good claim that you bought it for me. It's true that you were here for the duration of the 3 years. However, he's claiming the fact that you were here for the duration of 3 years doesn't verify anything. It doesn't verify that you've actually made a chazaka. It just verifies that you are here. But you know what? You were here as my guest. And I didn't bother protesting the fact that you're here because how can you make a chazaka while living in my house as my guest? Now, the question is, who's right? So, also the Kamed Rav Nachman, they came before Rav Nachman, and Amar Lei, Rav Nachman told the machzik, the person who's trying to establish a chazaka, zil berar achilascha. You have to actually validate that your chazaka actually was a real chazaka, and that person was not sharing the residence with you the entire time. Amar Lei Rava, Rava responded, and he said, Hachi Dina, is that really the case? That the person has to validate his chazaka? Hamotzi mechavero alav haraya. So this is a concept that we've been seeing over and over and over again throughout Shas, but most certainly in Bava Metzia, it's one of the key principles. Bava Kama comes up as well. Hamotzi mechavero alav haraya. Anybody who wants to take money away from someone else who's holding on to something, it is upon them to figure out how they're going to prove it. Now, what Rava is essentially saying is that when you look at this guy, let's just call him Shimon, okay? Shimon's the original owner. Ruvain's the original owner. Shimon is the one who's trying to establish a chazak over here. So now, Shimon, does he have a valid claim that he bought the house? Seems so. He makes a claim that he bought the house. Was he living in the house unprotested, uncontested for the past 3 years? The answer is yes. Says Rava, therefore it would stand to reason that this guy actually has a full-fledged valid chazaka and he is living inside his own home. Now you, Reuven, want to come by and throw some information at us that would call into question his chazaka? Well, the guy's a muhzik. Reuven is here as a muhzik. He's holding onto the property. He's living in the property. You're the one who's taking the property away from somebody, and therefore you have to prove that indeed you're correct. The problem just is, for Rami Rava ad Rava, for Rami Rav Nachman ad Rav Nachman. Rava and Rav Nachman, apparently they sat together to litigate many of these types of disputes. The Gemara says the problem just is that it seems like there's inconsistency in the way that they've ruled on similar cases. Why? Dehahu, turning to the top of Lamed Amar Aleph, Dahu de Amar le lechavre, there was this person who said to his friend, Kol nichse de Beibar Sisin mizavina lecha. I am selling you all of my properties that are called or that came from the family of Bar Sisin. So again, this person must have been a large real estate developer, or he owned a lot of properties, and he was liquidating some of his properties. He was selling a whole section of his properties. So he was selling a number of properties that were called the Bei Bar Sisin. It seems like from Rashbam, he says, Kol osan karkos shekanisi mi osu adam sheshmo Bar Sisin. In other words, I purchased many properties from a real estate named Bar Sisin. It has the name Bar Sisin on it, and any one of those properties that I bought from Bar Sisin, I'm now selling them off to you. Okay. So Hahi Ara, the Havi Mikri de Bei Bar Sisin. There was one particular piece of property that was called Bar Sisin. I don't know, maybe there was a sign on the front of it that said Bar Sisin. or just was identified on the map as a bar sisin property. Amar le. However, the seller said to him, "Oh, hold on a second. No, halav be bar sisin. That piece of property is not really the be bar sisin. V'ikruyahu de mikri de be bar sisin. It's just called be bar sisin." In other words, as Rashbam pointed out, what he meant when he was selling him all the properties of be bar sisin was all the properties that this guy, again, let's call him Ruvain, originally bought from the bar sisin family. He was now selling off those properties to another person. Okay, so kind of like a fix and flip. He bought a bunch of properties from bar sisin, he renovated them, and now he wants to go ahead and flip them to the next seller. So he says, all those properties that I bought from the bar sisins, all those I'd like to go ahead and flip them and sell them to you. Now, buyer goes ahead, he pays the money for all those fields, or all those properties, he now goes into those properties and he starts establishing his ownership over a particular bar sisin property, and the original seller, Ruvain, says, "Oh, no, we made a mistake. That property that you're actually identifying as bar sisin, it's called the bar sisin property, but it was not included in that sale because I didn't actually buy that property from bar sisin." So this is a pretty significant argument. Also, l'kamed Rav Nachman. So they came before Rav Nachman, and what happened? Ukma biyada delokeach. He said that the buyer in this case is right. Why? And the Gemara is going to explain. You told him you're selling him all the properties that are called bar sisin. That's what you said. And this property, guess what? It's called bar sisin. And therefore he gets it. Amalei Rava responded to Rav Nachman and said, Dina hachi, is that indeed the halacha? Hamotzi mechavero alav haraya. You want to take something away from somebody else, you have to prove it. Now what's interesting is that the Gemara, if you look at the Rashbam simplifies this without getting into any lavdus. The way the Gemara understands this stira is that in the first case, Rava left the field in dispute, or the home in dispute, in the hands of the buyer. In this case, Rava left the field in dispute in the hands of the seller. And Rav Nachman was exactly the opposite. In the previous case, where the guy was living inside the innermost chambers of the home, and he claims that he shared the property with this guy the entire time, Rav Nachman was the one who kept the property in the hands of the mocher. And in this case, of the property in dispute, the bar sisin property, Rav Nachman left it in the hands of the buyer. So now, on a basic level, it's a little bit difficult to understand why this is a stira, especially since Rava's words were exactly the same in both cases. He didn't say it belongs to the mocher. He didn't say it belongs to the lokeach. He just shouted out a principle in Shas, which is Hamotzi mechavero alav l'havi araya. You want to take something away from somebody else? Guess what? You want someone else's money? You want someone to make a withdrawal from their bank account and pay you money? You have to actually prove it. Go get Eidim. Bring solid proof that it belongs to you. Now it happens to be that that's going to manifest differently in different cases. Sometimes the person who's holding onto the money's name might be lokeach. Sometimes the person who's holding onto the money might be mocher. So why is this a stira? So the way that I understand this, and I think that this is essentially what the Rashbam is pointing out. He's not, which is interesting, the Rashbam writes a lot. In this case, he's not writing so much. But I think that that's essentially the point that the Gemara is asking about, which is when you have a person who, at face value, without knowing too much information, should own something, what's the status quo? In other words, a person goes into a field. He makes a claim that he bought it. He establishes a chazaka. Do we say that the status quo or the default position that we're going to take is that it belongs to the buyer? And therefore, if the seller wants to go ahead and throw additional information into this case, he has to prove it? Or do we put the default with the seller? In other words, this property is in dispute. Everybody agrees with that. It's not new news that both of these properties are in dispute. The question just is, when a buyer goes through all the motions, which technically should give him the field, and a seller wants to present new information to us that would invalidate that sale, what's the default? Is the default that it belongs to the buyer and the seller needs to validate his claim? Or is the default that the sale never happened and the buyer needs to establish the claim? Because again, it's clear that there's a dispute here. No one could say that there's no dispute. Everyone agrees that there's a valid claim, which is something which is very unique about Choshe Mishpah. And that's why it's so important to make sure that when Choshe Mishpah questions come up, that they're adjudicated properly and they're based in not that it's just that each guy goes to his particular Rav. Because when you hear a case, both claims often make a lot of sense. And as a matter of fact, both people really think that they're right. There are very few cases in the Choshe Mishpah where a person knows that he's a thief and he's just trying to come by and try to rip people off. Those people exist as well. That's not the majority of cases that come to a beis din. That's why it's so important that a third party beis din get involved. One of the things that I was told many years ago when I was first starting my journey in Halakha, I was living in Lakewood. I used to learn in the Beis Medrash in Village Park in a shul. The Rabbi is Reb Michel Ber Weismendel. He's an Englishman and a tremendous Talmud Chacham. A tremendous Baki in Choshe Mishpah. And at that particular time I was learning, I don't remember what it was, an area of Choshe Mishpah. I was in his shul and I spent some time talking with him about the particular case. And he asked me afterwards, "You plan to go into Dayanis?" I said, "I don't know, I'm just learning now." He said, "Don't." So I said, "Why?" He said, "You lose all your friends. You never have any friends ever again." Which is, again, I think he was joking, but I think the point really is that when friends come to ask questions like this, they're convinced they're right. And the reason is because the claim has validity to it. In this case, we understand the mistake that happened here. The mistake was that he just was unclear. He said, "I'm selling you all the Barsisan properties." And now there just was additional information that wasn't made clear. He claimed that, yes, it's called Barsisan. This is not what I had in mind. The question is, now what? So now what? You said you're selling him all the Barsisan properties. So now upon who does the burden fall to actually validate which claim works? Is it the words that came out of your mouth, which is Barsisan, or was it the intention, or maybe what should have been the clear intention, that it's just those homes that you bought, part of that original sale from Barsisan, you're transferring to him, and this property happens to have that name, but it's not included in it. So now Rava seems to take the position, in one case, that it's upon the mocher to prove it. In other words, when there's additional information that comes out later about a sale, whose responsibility is it to prove that additional information? It's the mocher's responsibility, and therefore it should be consistent in every single case. Case number one, a person bought a property and he moved in, or claims he bought a property, he moved in, he lived there for 3 years, he established his residence over there. Now you want to claim that that wasn't really moving in. That was just staying over on my property as a guest for 3 years. So then it should be consistent in the next case as well. There's a sale that happened. You want to claim that sale wasn't a full sale because there's additional information. It should be upon the mocher to prove it. Reb Nachman takes the other approach. Nachman seems to say that whenever there's a sale, the default position is that everything belongs to the mocher, and then the buyer has to go ahead and validate the claims. That's why the Gemara considers this to be a stira. I'm just going to point out that's beyond the scope of this year, but there are other Rishonim, such as the Ran, that have a very different understanding of this, but we're not going to get into that right now. So the Gemara says as follows. Kasha de Rava, Kasha de Rav Nachman, de Rav Nachman. So the Gemara says, de Rava lo Kasha, the stira between Rava is not really a problem. In other words, there's no contradiction in Rava's psak, because Hasam mocher ka'i b'nichsei, Hacha lokeach ka'i b'nichsei. So Rava, he basically answers this question by explaining what we just said before, which is, all I was saying was the most mechayel of Aryeh. I'm just saying, you want something, you have to prove that. You want to take something away from somebody else, you have to prove. that you deserve it. So now, it depends. Who's actually living in the field? Who's living there? In the previous case, the guy's been living there for 3 years. So he's there, he's standing in the property, his family is there, everything that he knows is inside that property. You want to take it away from him, so go ahead, prove it. In our case, the lokeach is the one who's showing up, the buyer's showing up and saying, hey, listen, I bought all the Vegh Bar Sisan properties, could you leave? So Rabbi says, listen, there's a dispute. The one who's actually there gets to keep it. So it has nothing to do with buyer and seller. It just has to do with who is physically located in the property. And then Reb Nachman Nami Lo Kasha. There's no contradiction in Reb Nachman's opinion. Why? Kivan, and he explains, Kivan de Amar Le de Vegh Bar Sisan, because he said to him at the time of the sale that he's selling all the properties that are called Vegh Bar Sisan. And guess what? Umikri de Vegh Bar Sisan. This property has that name. So therefore, Allah the Deiram Legluye the Lav the Vegh Bar Sisan. If you want to go ahead and tell me that something which is called Vegh Bar Sisan is not really Vegh Bar Sisan, says Rav Nachman, I can't help you. Now, you're going to have to prove that one. Look at the contract. It says all the properties that are called Vegh Bar Sisan are sold? Yes. Is this property called Vegh Bar Sisan? Yes. You want to go ahead and say, it's not really Vegh Bar Sisan? Sorry, sir. You're going to have to explain that one a little bit better. You're going to have to actually come with real proof that this property is not a real Vegh Bar Sisan property. But other than that, says Rav Nachman, I can't help you. So it's not a stira. Gemara essentially moves away from this thought process. We're not deciding who the default is. It's not a default. Is it by default the sellers, by default the buyers? That has nothing to do with anything. It really just depends on the facts of the case. Rava says, who's there? The guy who's there is the muvhak, and therefore the other person is going to go ahead and have to prove it. Says Rav Nachman, I'm not bought into any particular school of thought. But one thing I will tell you is, in the previous case, the guy made a valid claim. I was living there the whole time. All right, it's a fine claim. In this case, the guy's claim makes no sense. He's claiming, you don't get the property because I don't think it's called Vegh Bar Sisan. I'm so sorry. It's called Vegh Bar Sisan. That's what it is. You're going to have to prove otherwise if you don't want that to be part of the sale. And he goes on and explains, Aval hacha lo yehei elo denakit shtara. So this is the part that I'm leaving out, which is very important. Aval hacha lo yehei elo denakit shtara. And milo amrinon le kayim shtarcha v'kum v'nichsei. So this is a very important point about Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman is pointing out that how do we view chazaka? What is a chazaka? A chazaka is your proof that you bought the field. So let's go to the highest possible proof that you bought a field. A shtar. You have the document, the bill of sale, that says that you bought the field. What happens if you present a document, a bill of sale to a beis din that says, your name is Shimon, you bought a piece of property from Reuven. And Reuven goes ahead and throws a problem with the shtar. He says, that shtar, it's mezuyah. Or these signatures are not validated. What do you have to do? Validate it. You have to get the eidim, and the eidim will come and validate that they actually signed this shtar. And they'll be able to say that this is a good document. So, says Rav Nachman, it's not new news that when you have some type of proof of purchase that we ask you to validate it. So just like when it comes to the highest element of proof, which is a document, you have to actually show us that the document is valid. So if you have something which is a chazaka is good, but it's not as good as a shtar. So listen, you're holding on to your chazaka. I, as the seller, am claiming that your chazaka, which let's just say for the sake of the argument, is equivalent to a shtar. Well, listen, I could go ahead and call a shtar, a document, into question, so I can call your chazaka into question. Just like if I call your shtar into question, it's upon you to figure out how to validate your shtar. So if I call your chazaka into question, it's upon you to validate that your chazaka is good. And therefore, says Rav Nachman, I have no problem with the case of the shchuni gavai. The guy says, hey, listen, you were there for 3 years, very nice, I agree with you. But so was I. I was passing through there every single day. And therefore, I'm calling your chazaka into question. Go ahead and validate it. Says Rav Nachman, there's no steer between the cases. In one case, I'm asking you to verify your chazaka, which is just as good as verifying your shtar. In another case, I'm just not buying what you're selling. You're claiming to me that this thing's not called Bei Bar Sisin? Come on, that's not a normal claim. And therefore, it's called Bar Sisin. If it looks like a Bar Sisin, and it talks like a Bar Sisin, and everything else about it looks like a Bar Sisin, then guess what? It's a Bar Sisin. Next one. Hahu da'amar lechavre. There was a guy who told his friend, "My boy is b'hai besa. What are you doing in this house?" Amar le, he responds to him, and he says, "Binach zavinte. I bought this house from you. Va'achalte shnei chazaka, and I was here for the requisite years of chazaka." Amar le, the guy said to him, "B'shuke broi havi. You know why I never came by during that period of time that you were living in my house? I was out of town on business. I had to go out of town. It's what I do. I'm a busy man. I'm constantly out of town on business, and I guess you must have known that, so you moved into my house. You found out that I wasn't there, but I didn't have the ability to be mocha to go ahead and protest your living there because I was out of town." So now Rashbam points out, if you look at Rashbam, it's in the fourth wide line, he says, "Be'eretz merchakim, I was in a faraway land, makom she'ein hashayaros mitzuyos." It's a place where there isn't constant traffic back and forth to that place. And therefore he says, "V'lo yodati, v'lachein lo machisi." I had no idea you were living in my house, and therefore I didn't protest the fact that you're living in my house. And he goes on to explain that if this was a place where there were shayaros mitzuyos, if there were caravans going back and forth between these cities, then the rule that we applied yesterday, which is chavra islay, v'chavra chavra islay, would apply. In other words, you don't have to actually be in town to find out the hak of the town. People find things out pretty quickly. And if there was constant traffic going back and forth, even before cell phone days and email days and, the widespread of information through newspapers and all that stuff, people would find out. A guy would show up in this marketplace and say, "Oh, Yankel, how you doing? Oh, great. How are things going back at home? I saw you sold your house." "What? I didn't sell my house." "Well, what do you mean? The Goldstein family is living in there." He would find out and he'd say, "Well, hold on a second. They don't belong in my house. I never sold my house. That's a valid macha." He'd call over to Eidim and say, "I don't know what's going on here. I'm just trying to conduct my business. I'm trying to buy some wares to go ahead and to come back to the marketplace and sell. Somebody else moved into my house? Absolutely not. Nothing to talk about. As soon as I get back, I'm kicking them out." That would be a valid macha. In this case, his claim is, I went to a real faraway place. I was producing things in China, and there was no traffic back and forth. I couldn't find out what was going on there, and therefore I had absolutely no idea that you were there. Now that I find out that you're there, out. Amar Lei said back to him, the problem is, V'ha isli sa'adi, I have witnesses who can testify, Dikol shata havi asas tlasin yomi. Every single year, you used to come back for 30 days. This is an example of a case that, like I mentioned at the beginning of this year, why is it necessary that every single year he came back for 30 days? Why 30 days? Why couldn't you just say, I have eidos that 1 year you came back for 30 days? Right? And you didn't make, or at the end of the 3 years you came back and didn't make a macha. The answer is because this was the story. This just was the story that happened. So he says to him, every year everybody knows that you come back to the marketplace and you're busy doing business. So I have witnesses that you came back to town for 30 days out of every single year. So you're right, you were out of town for 11 out of 12 months every single year. But everybody knows that for a month you came back to town, which afforded you plenty of time to come by and to protest my dwelling in this house. The fact that you didn't do that is proof that it's actually my home. I bought it, I own it, and now 3 years later, you're just showing up, making a macha, trying to kick me out of the house. But guess what? Too late. Amar Lei, so he responded to him and said, Plus and Yomi, those 30 days that I was here in town, Beshuki Havitaridna, what do you think I came back for? I came back to do business. I spent 11 months out of town trying to buy things like this I can sell it for 30 days in the marketplace. You think I'm coming back and worrying about kicking you out of the house? So now the question is, where did he live? Where did he live for those 30 days? So Rashbam on the bottom says, V'shuki evitridna linkar sechora. So I came back to sell my wares, v'likno sachero, so to buy other ones. V'lo yodati sha'ata dar bevesi. I had no idea that you were in my house. Ukigon, says Rashbam, sheyesh lo bayis achar ba'osa ir shahaya misaschem sham kol amid yom. This guy owns other properties. He came back for a short period of time. Maybe he was staying in his studio apartment, which was close to the marketplace. He didn't bother going to his house that he has there because, I don't know, maybe his family was still someplace else. So he came back, he stayed over in a small place, which is his other house. Now it seems like Rashi just wouldn't buy the idea that the guy would say, oh, I just stayed in a hotel or something like that. Because why would you stay in a hotel if you have a house in town? So the answer is he has multiple homes, and he chose to stay in another home. So therefore he had no idea. So now the question is, who wins in this case? Amar Rava, Avid Inish Tekot Plasin Yomi Tar Bashuka. Says Rava, this is perfectly reasonable. This is reasonable. People can be busy at work for 30 days. And therefore, the guy's chazaka doesn't work, and this is considered to be a valid macha. Why? Because the person went ahead and protested this guy's dwelling in his property at the first possible opportunity that he had to find out about it. For 3 years, he's been out of town, he's been on business. The short stints of time that he came back to town to actually do business over here, he had no idea the guy was living in his house. At the first possible knowledge that he had that someone was living in his house, he protested him, and therefore that's considered valid, and therefore the chazaka doesn't work. Next. Hudar Malay Lechavre. There was a guy who said to his friend, "My bias bahai ara. What are you doing on this particular piece of real estate?" Amar Le, he said to him, listen to this one. Mi planya zavinte. I bought this from somebody. Da Amar Li. Some take out this word. Some just say, just skip those words, which is the zavna minach. So let's just give names over here to make this easier. We'll have Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. Ruvain shows up to a piece of property and finds Levi living there. And he says, Levi, what are you doing on this piece of property? No trespassing. And Levi says, Ruvain, I bought this piece of property from Shimon, who originally bought it from you. Okay? So now, he added in a piece of information there, which technically he didn't have to add in. He said, I bought it from Shimon, who bought it from you. Now, he could have just said, why am I here? Because I bought it. Who did you buy it from? Shimon. Shimon was the seller. I'm the buyer. I paid for it, and I'm here. Now, what's interesting about this case is there's no chazaka. He's not claiming I'm here for 3 years. So here, it's just simply Reuven coming to Levi and saying, what are you doing in this property? And Levi says, I bought it from Shimon. Now, I happen to know that you used to own this piece of property. So therefore, he says, I bought it from Shimon, who bought it from you. So therein lies his mistake. So Amar Le, so now Reuven says to him, Atlav kamodis, do not actually admit, turn to the top of Laman Amud Beis, Dehai ara didihi, are you not going to agree that at some point in time this piece of property was mine? Well, obviously you do. You just told me that you bought it from Shimon, who bought it from me. If that's the case, v'at lo zavinti minai, did you buy it from me? No, you admitted that. Therefore, lav bal dvarim didiat, I've got nothing to do with you. You got a problem with Shimon. He sold you the Brooklyn Bridge. Go deal with him. So what's the halacha? Amar Rava dina ka amar le. Reuven has a valid claim. Okay, it's a very valid claim. Reuven comes to Levi and says, what are you doing in this property? Levi says, I bought it from Shimon, who bought it from you. Reuven says, thank you very much for acknowledging that this property used to belong to me. I have nothing to do with you. I have nothing to do with Shimon. It's my property. You admitted you didn't buy it from me. You admitted that it used to belong to me. So therefore, have a nice day. Get out of the piece of property. Now, if you'll notice, you may have noticed that in the previous Amud, there's a Tosus that's the size of the entire page, and then a little bit more. So now, I'm not going to go through the whole Tosus right now, but especially since it's really Tosus making one point, and bringing several rayas. He adds the Rashba at the end and a couple other shitos. But really, the truth is, Rashbam actually addresses this as well. So it's worthwhile going through this just to understand a little bit. There's a concept in Shas, which we've had many times, called the migu. A migu it literally translates as since, but it's the beginning of a sentence, which migu always means, since I could have said A, believe me when I say B. In other words, if I'm lying to you, if I was a liar, and I was saying something which was false, I probably would have given some thought to my lie to say a lie that would work. If I'm lying and saying something which is a very weak claim, you should believe me because I could have come up with a good, massive fib. In other words, if I wanted to lie, I'll come up with a good lie. If I come up with such a poor lie, believe me that what I'm saying is true. So now, in this case, the question just is, what if the guy would have just said, I bought it from you. I bought it from you. Or, I bought it from you and I have a chazaka. So, the problem just is, if you look over here, there's a very important part of this claim over here, which, let's just see the top of the Rashbam for a second. Just want to get to the key point. Let's just read it together. Top of the Rashbam on Taf Lama Amud Beis. Kolomar. Sha'omar li b'shas mechira shehu lakcha mimcha. I bought this from Shimon. He told me at the time of the sale that you were the original owner. Now, ume'achar shelo to'an v'achalte shnei chazaka. Since he didn't claim that he was there for the requisite years, shtar mechira shelo odene biyado. He's obviously still holding on to the contract. At the end, we leave it in the hands of the one who's protesting this. And he explains, here's the reason. Since Levi admits that it used to belong to Ruvain, certainly if he wasn't there for 3 years, he doesn't get it. Even if he was there for 3 years, Nami eina chazaka. That chazaka is worthless. Do you know why? Mafgina le minei da chazaka she'ein ima tainagi. This is a very important point. We spent time talking about this 2 days ago, which is that whenever you want to establish ownership of a field through chazaka, you have to have 2 things. Number 1, a valid chazaka. So that was today's discussion. You're in a field or in a home. You claim that you're there for 3 years. So now, it has to be a valid chazaka. The person must have had an opportunity to protest you. It has to be that you were living there by yourself, without the other guy partnering with you. So you have to establish that. All right. So in this case, let's say establishes he was there 3 years uncontested. You also have to have a valid claim how you got there. You can't just say, oh yeah, I've been here for 10 years. I've been here for 20 years. How'd you get here? Oh, I don't know. I just got here. That's not good. You have to have a valid claim. I bought it. I got it as a gift. I inherited it. Something. Here, what's your claim? I bought it from Shimon. Who is Shimon? Shimon has nothing to do with this. He's a random guy in the street. Some guy sold you the Brooklyn Bridge, and therefore I should give you my property? Nothing to talk about. So therefore, Rashbam explains that even if you had a chazaka, it would be worthless because your claim has nothing to it. Your claim has nothing to stand on. However, he writes, I'm going to skip down a little bit. We'll go to the Rashbam 3 lines before it starts to get white. Aval hichzik zeh shalosh shanim. If this guy Levi was there for 3 years, v'ta'in, and he claims, miplanya zavinta, dezavna minach, the same claim, but he adds 2 words. Dezavna minach kamoi didi. I watched you sell it to him. So now what he did was, he actually came up with a real good claim. He's saying to him, I'm here for 3 years, I bought it from Shimon, but I'm not just telling you some random Shimon guy sold me the field. I know you used to own it, but I also know that you sold it to Shimon. So in such a case, Kolomar sheyodati bebirur shelokcha mincha, I know that he bought it from you. In such a case, Neman, he's believed. Why is he believed? He has no eidim for that. Says Rashi, Migu di'iboy omar anaza vinta minach v'chalti shnei chazaka. If I was lying to you and just making up this whole story right now in front of us, fabricating this whole story, you know what it would have said? What am I doing here? I'm doing here because I bought the field from you 3 years ago and have a chazaka. Then you'd be done. You'd have nothing to say back to me because I'm here. I bought it from you. I have a chazaka. No macha, no protest. I get to keep the land. The problem is that I said that I bought it from Shimon, but I actually said I bought it from Shimon in front of you. That's a valid claim. All right, let's move on. Yehuda Amar lechavre. There's a person who said to his friend, "My boy is b'hai ara. What are you doing in this land?" Amar le, he said to him, "Mi planya zavina b'chalti shnei chazaka." I'm here because I bought this land from some guy, and I have the requisite years of chazaka. Amar le, he said, "Planya, that guy who sold you the field, gazlanahu. I agree you bought the field from him. However, he's a thief. He stole it from me. So therefore, he had no right to sell the field to you." So it's a little bit different than the previous case. In the previous case, Reuben is essentially just saying, I have no idea who Shimon is. Shimon's not a relevant party. Here, Reuben says, I know that Shimon sold you the field. I agree that Shimon sold you the field. But you know why he was in the field? He stole it from me. So listen to this. Amar Le, so the buyer, we'll call him Levi, he says to him, V'ha'isli sadi da'asoi imlechi becha. I came to you. I knew you were a big real estate guy. I was buying this piece of property. I wanted some real estate advice. So I came to you, Mr. Reuven, and I said, Reuven, should I buy this piece of property? V'amrit li, you told me, Zavin, go buy it. So I asked you for advice. Should I buy this piece of property? And you said, yeah, go ahead, go buy it. It's a good piece of property. So now you're coming back and claiming that the guy who sold it to me is a thief? You're contradicting your own good advice. Amar Le, he said to him, yeah, that's actually what happened. But Hasheni Noachli, Harishan Kashe Menu. I didn't want to mess around with that guy. The proof is in the pudding. He stole the field from me. Right? The guy stole the field from me. I couldn't deal with that guy. He was too difficult for me. So this was brilliant. You were about to go ahead and buy the piece of property. You're one of these guys who are easy to deal with. So I figured I'd rather deal with you and take the property back from you than deal with the thief. Amar Rava says, Dina Kamarle. It makes sense. This is a valid claim. In other words, you just get into the guy's mind. The first guy, Shimon, stole the field from him. He's like a bandit. He's a thief. He kicked him out of his own property. So he didn't want to deal with that guy. You came by, you offered to buy it. This was my exit. This was my way to get my field back by having you be the carbon to buy it from the thief. And now he gets it back. I think Gemara says, hold on, come on. According to whose opinion are we following? Admon. This seems to follow the opinion of Admon, which is Shalok Halacha. For it says in the Mishnah, Ha'orer al-asad, a person goes he goes to protest someone living in a field. However, the person who's protesting someone else being in his field, v'chasim aleh ba'ed. He's one of the guys signed on the bill of sale that says that this guy bought it. So now, Admon Omer Hasheni Noachli Harishon Kasha Imenu. The actual witness on the document that the field was sold to Shimon to Levi, can say, you know why I signed the document? I was thrilled to get the field out of the hands of Shimon. Therefore, I can go ahead and take it up with Levi, who's an easier guy to deal with. Sorry, you signed the bill of sale that sells the field to Levi. You can't come back now and say the field that was sold by Shimon is stolen. But the problem is, our Gemara seems to be following Admon's opinion, which is Shalok Halacha. Where it says Afilu Tema Rabbanan. We could say our case follows Rabbanan as well. Hasam, in that case, Avad Le Maisa. The guy signed a document. He did something to validate the sale of the field from Shimon to Levi. In that case, you can't reverse that. However, Abul Hacha Dibura Avid Inish Demikri Amar. Sometimes people say things. All he did was, he said, oh yeah, you want to buy that field? That'd be a good idea. Go ahead and buy it. It's not a nice thing to do. As a matter of fact, it violates Nisra Midaraisa of Lufnei Iver L'Sitei Milchra because it's called giving an Eitzish Eino Genes. So there's a problem with that. But ultimately, it doesn't mean that he's not believed. One more case. Hahu, there was this person who said to his friend, "My boy is b'hai ara. What are you doing in this land?" Amar lei, he said to me, I bought it from some guy, and I satisfied the years of chazaka. Amar lei, plani gazlanahu. That guy's a thief. Same case. Amar lei, hold on. Va'isli sadi da'asis be'orta va'amrit li zavdan ali. I have witnesses that you came to my house asking me to sell the property to you, and you made me a cash offer. You were ready to pay for it. So Amar lei, Amina, what I was thinking was, Izbun dinai. I'm willing to buy something that I own. There's two understandings of this. The simple understanding is, yes, sometimes people are willing to pay for things that they already own. And Rashbam explains that when you have a piece of property which is contested, you have to go take this person to court. It's a huge headache. Aside from all the legal fees that come along with it, it's a huge headache. Sometimes it's cheaper and easier to just shell out the money and buy something which rightfully belongs to you instead of fighting about it. So sometimes people actually go ahead and pay money for things that rightfully belong to them, and therefore it's a valid claim. We have some more time. This person who said to his friend, "My boss b'hai ara, what are you doing in this land?" Amar lei, you said to him, "Plania zavina, I bought it from somebody, lachalti shnei chazaka, and I satisfied the years of chazaka." Amar lei, you said to him, "V'hadna kitna shtara, I actually have a document in my hands, tezavni li minei ha'arbi shni." Let's use the names again. You have Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. So let's do this. Ruvain, make this go in order. You have Ruvain goes over to Levi and says, "What are you doing in this field?" Levi says, "I bought it from a guy by the name of Shimon. I've been here for the years of chazaka." So he says, Ruvain says, "Well, actually, I have a document that I bought this field from Shimon 4 years ago. So you claim that you bought this field from Shimon and you're here for the requisite 3 years. I have a document that I bought it from Shimon 4 years ago. So my document predates your chazaka." Amar lei, mi savrish shnei chazaka tlasni kamina. You think I was only here for 3 years? Shnei chazaka tuva kamina. I said I have the requisite years of chazaka. I'm here for many years. I'm here for much longer than 4 years. Much longer than 3 years. So my chazaka predates your star. Amarava avat nish dekar shnei tuva shnei chazaka. It actually is quite reasonable for a person to refer to more than 3 years as the years of chazaka. The Gemara says, "Hani mili the achla sheva." You have to have a minimum of 7 years that you were there. The kadim chazaka dahai l'shtar dahach. You have to have a full 3-year chazaka before that guy's document comes about. Aval, top of Lamed Aleph and Aleph. Shis, if he's only there for 6 years, ein lecha macha gedola mizu. What better protest to your chazaka is there other than the original owner selling it to somebody else? So if you're there for 6 years, and that means 2 years into your chazaka establishment, the owner sells the field to another person, in such a case, even though you're there for 6 years, you have to recognize 2 years into your chazaka, there was a protest that was made against your ownership, and therefore your chazaka doesn't count, and therefore it won't work. Rabbi, it's been a pleasure and an honor to learn with you over the last week. I believe the Rav will be back tomorrow morning.